Kurukshetra, Arjun is in a state of complete nervous collapse. You could say in modern times he might have been said to be suffering from both anxiety neurosis and panic disorder. And in this terrified state of mind, the cause of this terrified state of mind is his knowledge of the law of karma. So you have to understand that on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, there were two wars that were going on. One was a war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas and their allies on both sides. On the other side, the war existed between two philosophies. The philosophies of adharma, where people were frightened, or kings were frightened into adharma by being bludgeoned by the law of karma, and the law of dharma, which Krishna was upholding, where he was teaching Arjun how to bust karma. Therefore, you must understand, especially those of you who are afraid of the law of karma, you must understand that the Bhagavad Geeta is a karma busting book. It is a book that is designed to help you to bust the fear of karma and to teach you how to transcend karma. So in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna begins to explain to Arjun the path of Sankhya, which is the predominant philosophy in the Bhagavad Gita. The predominant philosophy in the Bhagavad Gita is not Vedanta, although it is used later, subsuming all philosophies to it. Essentially, it is a discussion on the law of Sankhya. And in this law of Sankhya, which he is teaching him, laws of Sankhya, philosophy of Sankhya, he teaches him about the nature of the soul. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavaka, na chainyam kledyanti apo, na shoshati maruta. He's teaching him that you are the soul, you cannot be burnt by fire, you cannot be wet by water, you cannot be cut by the sword, you cannot be dried by the wind, and so on and so forth. And he teaches him that therefore you cannot die, nor can you kill anybody. You cannot kill, nor can you be killed. Because what you are seeing is the surface, but the real world consists of individual souls who never die. In fact, these souls, they come back again and again and again into this world through repeated cycles of birth and death. So you might think, wow, this is great. I get a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. But the Bhagavad Gita also emphasizes, and you'll find this in the later part of Bhagavad Gita, that this world is a dukhalayam ashashvatam. This is a place of misery where everything is temporary. Dukhalayam ashashvatam. He also says this is a anityam, asukham lokam. Krishna points out that this is a place where nothing is permanent and where you cannot find lasting happiness. And he further adds to Arjuna that Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukha Dosha Anudarshanam. Birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, unhappiness, they are all guaranteed to you. So in this world, suffering is guaranteed. And the nature of the soul is to constantly struggle against Prakriti. If you go into the Bhagavad Gita, you will find that Krishna is actually saying that the birth of all living creatures is a union between Purush and Prakriti. He says in the 14th chapter, in the third text, Mama yonir mahad brahma tasmin garbham dadhamya aham sambhavah sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharatah. He says this material substance called the Mahat, which is nothing but Prakriti, is impregnated by me, Purush, and I make possible the births of all living beings, O son of Bharata. So Krishna says in the next verse in 14.4, Sarva yonishu kaunteya murtayah sambhavanti yah tasham brahma mahadyonir aham bija prajapitah. So you understand that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and I am the seed-giving father. So there is Prakriti in the form of Mahat, there is Purush, and this Purush impregnates this Mahat or Prakriti, and when it impregnates Mahat or Prakriti, living entities are produced who are composed of both Purush and Prakriti. So you are part Purush and you are part Prakriti. That part of which you are as Purush is infinitesimal. You are an ounce of the main Purush. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Mamai vansho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanah manashasta indriyani prakritistani karshati. So how does this struggle begin? How does this suffering begin? The suffering begins because you're an infinitesimal part of the Lord or Purush. And you are also struggling with your mind and your five senses, which are nothing more than Prakriti. So one part of you is Prakriti, one part of you is Purush. And this part of you, which is Purush and Prakriti, is the composite which you are. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Bhumi apo nalo vayur kham mano buddhirevacha ahankara ityam me bhinna prakriti ashtada. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are all part of my inferior energies. Bhinna prakriti, separated energies, inferior energies. And yet, you are also an ounce of Purush. Aparyam itastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabhao yayedam dharyate jagat. And Krishna explains that you are really Purush, not Prakriti. And you are sustaining and maintaining creation. As long as you are bound to Purush, as long as you are bound to Prakriti, this Purush is guaranteed to go into repeated cycles of birth and death and suffering and old age and disease. These will keep on occurring in this world. But if you want to become free from Prakriti and you want to return back to Purush, you want to return back to God, then you must seek what is known as moksha, which is freedom from Prakriti. Now, according to the definitions that exist of moksha, because moksha exists in many religions and it exists in Shramana philosophies, it exists in modern day Jainism and Buddhism, it exists in Sikhism. So you must understand what is moksha according to Bhagavad Gita. According to Bhagavad Gita, moksha means reunion with God. And that reunion with God takes place when you leave the body. And all this is described in great detail in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The traditional method of becoming free from Prakriti, as described in the Chandogya Upanishad, and the method described by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, which is to be absorbed in God, remembering the Lord and forgetting oneself, thereby your Prakriti returns to Prakriti, the Mahat, and you move on to reunite with the Lord. However, there is one concept which is called Jeevan Mukti. Because after all, when you tell somebody that you're going to go to heaven, or you're going to get moksha, or you're going to go back to God, so you are giving them a post-dated check. What's a post-dated check? See, if you do all this, then I assure you, you will not go to hell or to purgatory, but you will go to heaven. It's not very different from what people say that no, you worship in this manner and then you will become free from Prakriti and suffering and go back to God. So they developed a school of philosophy which was known as Jeevan Mukti. And this idea of Jeevan Mukti is that even as you live within this world, even as you live within an envelope which is of Prakriti, the Purush is free from this Prakriti. And therefore, such an individual has attained moksha within this body itself. And having attained moksha within this body itself, the phenomenon is known as Jeevan Mukti. Now, this is a very fascinating concept because the idea of attaining Jeevan Mukti or attaining freedom from Prakriti, even while living in this world and being encased in a material envelope of Prakriti, is definitely very attractive. But the Bhagavad Gita, in this entire 18 chapters, describes repeatedly the platform of what could be the characteristics of the Jeevan Mukti. But mind you, nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita, nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita is there the mention. You may find it in somebody's commentary or you may find it in somebody's purport. But nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita is the actual term Jeevan Mukt mentioned at all. In the second chapter, Krishna is asked by Arjuna in text 54. Arjuna vacha sthita pragnasya ka bhasha samadhi stasya keshava. Sthitadi kim prabhasheta kim asita vrajeta kim. What are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is merged in transcendence? How does he walk? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? How does he walk? You see, Arjuna is in a state of nervous collapse. He is the exact opposite of what Krishna is going to describe as Sthita Prajna. And Krishna is teaching Arjuna that don't be a fool in a state of nervous collapse. Don't be a person in the form of a nervous breakdown, in panic disorder, anxiety, neurosis, in depression. Instead, Krishna is telling him, you become a sthita prajna. You become a person who is situated in transcendence. You become a person who is having imbibed this philosophy of Sankhya, which I am teaching you. And I am also teaching you this path of yoga, which is to work in the world in a spirit of devotion and renunciation without expecting any fruits of labor, but yet fulfilling all your duties and responsibilities in the world and towards your family. You will attain this state called Sthita Prajna. And in text 55, Krishna begins the description of Sthita Prajna. Shri Bhagavan Vacha, Supreme Lord says, Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmanya evatmana tushta sthita pragnasta uchyate. O Arjun, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire, sense desire that arise from mental concoction, and when his mind finds satisfaction in the soul alone, then he is said to be in pure consciousness. That when the individual is absorbed in God and has forgotten self, when he is absorbed in God and has actually learned to detach himself from the world, because when you are attached to God, simultaneously you become detached from the world. This is the law. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prajata Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Cha Yadahitukam. If you worship Krishna, Vasudeva, Bhagavati, in the proper manner, then Krishna explains that without making a separate effort, you will acquire both spiritual knowledge of God, spiritual knowledge of self, and also, he says, you will acquire detachment from the world. So this is how Krishna begins the description of the person who is called Sthita Prajna. Dukheshu anudvignamana sukheshu vigat spriha. Veet rag bhaya krodh sthitidir muni uchyate. See, there are three types of miseries within the world. These miseries are miseries caused by your own self, mental diseases, worries, tension, stress, physical diseases of various sorts. So these are called adhyatmic problems or adhyatmic miseries. You also get bothered by other living entities. A mosquito may bite you, a dog may bite you, your boss may trouble you in your office, or other people, your loved ones, may speak harshly to you. This is another type of misery. Then you have Adi Daivik miseries. And these Adi Daivik miseries are those miseries that result from natural disasters and calamities. When you're caught in a downpour, when you're suffering under the hot sun, when you are trapped in a flood, when you are struck by lightning, all these are Adi Daivik miseries. So, one who is not disturbed despite all these miseries that come in life, who is not excited when there is happiness. So, when there's cause for depression and sorrow, he is not affected. When he is excited, when there's joy, there is no reason for him to get excited. He is still even minded. And he is free from attachment, fear, and anger. Such a person, he says, is called a sage of steady mind or the Sthita Prajna. यह सर्वत्र अनाभिष्णेह तत् तत् प्राप्य शुभ शुभम नाभिनंदति न द्वेषति तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठितः. Because he is without attachment, he does not rejoice when he attains something that's good. He does not lament when he attains what other people consider as bad or evil. He is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. Such is the sage of steady wisdom. So, this is the characteristic of the sage of steady wisdom. And this is reiterated again and again and again in the Bhagavad Gita. In the form of the Karma Yogi, it is described in detail in the 5th chapter. In the 6th chapter is described as the Dhyana. In the 12th chapter, you will find that it is described as the Bhakta of Krishna. You will find also that in the chapter on the gunas, he speaks about how one becomes gunatita, and the characteristics of the gunatita are also described there. And all of them are like this. Jitatmana prashantasya paramatma samahitah sitoshana sukha dukheshu tathamanapanayo. For one who's conquered his mind, for him God is already reached. For him heat, cold, joy, sorrow, honor, dishonor, they're all the same. So he looks upon gold and he looks upon a rock with equal emotional value. Samaloštashma kanchanaha. Surin mitrarya udasina madhyastha dvesha bandhushu sadhushu apicha papeshu samabuddhir. Very clearly he points out that whether that person is your friend, your enemy, your mediator, he is a saint, he is a sinner, you will look upon him with equal vision. In fact, Jnana Vijnana Triptatma Kutasto Vijatindriya Yukteti Uchyate Yogi Samaloštashma Kanchana. So, to him, material things have no value. To him, the nature of the person whom he is interacting with has no significance. He is completely, hermetically sealed from the sufferings of the world. And this goes on and on and on and on. So, is this Jeevan Mukti? And the answer is, it would appear to be, since it's quoted verse after verse in chapter after chapter after chapter. So many people who teach Bhagavad Gita often teach it as a person who is Jeevan Mukt, one who has become liberated from Prakriti permanently. The Bhagavad Gita, however, indicates that even if you reach that state of being the yogi, you must continue to work within the world for your purification. Kayena manasa buddhaya kevalerindriyerapi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye. With his body, kayena, manasa with the mind, buddhaya with the intelligence, discriminatory faculty, kevalerindriyerapi with all his senses, yogina karma kurvanti, the yogi endeavors and does his duties and his work within the world without attachment, sangam tyaktva. For what purpose? Atma shuddhaye. That means even after having attained all these states, which are described here in the Bhagavad Gita, you must continue to work, because as long as you are within this body, as long as you are in this material envelope, which is that of Prakriti, it is impossible for you to be completely free. And therefore, it's important for you to keep endeavoring at purifying yourself by continuing to work and do your duty within the world. He also says very clearly, Yagya dana tapah karma pavanani manishinam. Yagya dana tapah karma na karyam tyajam eva tat yagya dana tapah karma pavanani manishinam. Krishna points out that the performance of yajna, which is sacrifice, for you, Lord, not for me. Performing all activities in the world with the attitude, Lord, this is for you, not for me. So performing yajna, giving of yourself in charity and what you possess, and performing tapasya or austerities, which are described in the Bhagavad Gita, which tapasyas are preferred by Krishna. All these, Krishna says, purify even great souls. So therefore, not only does the Bhagavad Gita not mention the word Jeevan Mukti, but Krishna also mentions that these hallowed advanced spiritual states must not be taken for granted, but rather one must continue and endeavor towards purification By remaining in the world and doing your duty and fulfilling your responsibilities, and certainly not by taking sannyas. Sannyasastu mahavao dukkham aptum ayogata. Yoga yukta munir brahma na chiren adi gacchati. My dear Arjun, if you renounce the world without having attained union with God, you will get only sorrow. But one who works in the world in the spirit of devotion and renunciation, he attains the supreme without delay. So constantly, even though you may be an advanced yogi, fulfilling the criteria that are described in the Bhagavad Gita in the various chapters, you must continue to work in the world, doing your duty, fulfilling your responsibilities, remembering God, forgetting self, because this will continue to purify you. You must continue to do yajna, dana, and tapaha, because they purify even the great soul. And what happens when you don't do that? When you don't obey these instructions and you think that, aha, you might find many people claiming to be spiritual teachers who say, I have reached, I have found it, I have got it. On such a day, when I was sitting under the banyan tree, I was struck by a bolt of enlightenment and I have now become Jeevan Mukti. And therefore, I need not work. I need not do my duties or responsibilities. I have left everything in the world now. So if you ever find such a situation, you should understand that in the Bhagavad there is a verse which says, Ye anya aravindaksha vimukta maninas tvai ashtabhavad avishuddha buddhaya aruya kricharena parampada tataha patantyadho anadritam yusmadangraya. Brahma is speaking and he says, O lotus-eyed one, there are many people who claim to have reached that platform of moksha. And having reached that platform of moksha, they believe that all the tapasya and austerities they performed take them there are sufficient. But because they do not take shelter of your feet, they fall down back again into material consciousness. If you read the newspapers or you watch the television, you will find so many stories of gurus who have fallen down from their so-called elevated position. And it is because at some time they felt, I have reached. Jeevan Mukti is not some place to reach. It is a transitional waypoint. From Brahma Bhut, you go on to what is called as Parabhakti. When you reach this platform, which is there on all these different levels, Krishna says, you have reached the platform of Brahma Bhut. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kamshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. When you reach that platform of spiritual consciousness, at that platform, Krishna says, there is no more hankering, no more lamentation, no more desiring things, no more sorrowing about anything. You look upon all people with equal vision. And at that time, Krishna says, he gives you bhakti, para-bhakti. And it is through para-bhakti you know Krishna. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavanyashchashmi tatvata tato mam tattvato jnatva vishate tadanantaram. It is only through bhakti, para-bhakti, you know me as I am, and through that you enter into my being from where there is no return. Naham veder na tapasa na danena na cha ijjaya. bhaktyatva ananya shakya aham evam vido Arjuna. So it is not by reading books, attending lectures, or listening to lectures, or even giving lectures. Naham Veder, na tapasa, not by performing various tapasyas. Na danena, not essentially by giving charity. Na cha ijjaya, not by performing ritualistic worship. It's only through loving devotion you shall know me as I am. Undivided loving service you shall know me as I am. So yes, the Bhagavad Gita will describe and will come across many sections such as the Sthita Prajna, will come across the Dhyan Yogi, we will come across the Karma Yogi, we will come across the Bhakta, we will come across the Gunatirtha, and so on and so forth. But that is not, in my opinion, Jeevan Mukti, which is never mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. Never, never ever mentioned. If anything, it mentions that all these states are transitional waypoints to Parabhakti. Spiritual life begins at Brahmabhut, and it's an unending eternal path of Parabhakti. And the practice of Parabhakti prevents you from falling down back again into material consciousness. So I will pause here. If you have any queries or questions or comments, please go ahead.
Thank you for this very enlightening session, Shantanu ji. Um, so one question that I had was that the Bhagavad Gita talks about maintaining equanimity in life while you're going through the dualities of life, say success and failure, pleasure and pain. So how can one stay balanced in life?
If you are remembering God and forgetting self, if you are absorbed in performing your duties to the best of your abilities as an offering to the Supreme Lord, automatically you will please everybody. At the same time, as I pointed out, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Pravajita Jnanam Prayata. As you worship Krishna, you will progressively come to that realization that you are acquiring inadvertently spiritual knowledge and detachment from the world. This is how you acquire. So, through studying the Bhagavad Gita, by offering your everyday duties in a spirit of sacrifice to God, by chanting God's name when you're unoccupied so that your mind doesn't go on its monkey path, all these things, your sadhanas, your yagya, dana, tapaha, all of these will help you to become equanimous.
Also, since the Bhagavad Gita speaks about Jeevan Mukti, obviously the word is not mentioned as you said in the Bhagavad Gita, but it speaks about Jeevan Mukti. So what are the qualities of a person who's liberated in life?
So that is described here in the Bhagavad Gita. All of these symptoms are present over there. Each of you reads the chapter on Sita Prajna, section Sita Prajna in the second chapter, and so on and so forth, you will find. The person is the same in heat and cold, in joy and sorrow, in honor and dishonor, with friend and foe, with saint and sinner. He will see both the rock and piece of gold with equal vision. And yet he will continue to endeavor within the world in the spirit of sacrifice and devotion, remembering God.
Okay. And my last question would be that the Bhagavad Gita talks about Videha Mukti, liberation of the soul. So what happens to the soul after it attains moksha, attains liberation?
So that we will discuss when we do chapter 8 on what is Videha Mukti. We can do it in one of the following sessions. And in this Videha Mukti, the various conditions that one has to fulfill. But Krishna has made it very simple that if at the time of death we remember him and we are absorbed in him, he takes us back.
Thank you so much for today's enlightening session, Shantanu-ji. It was lovely speaking to you. And for all our viewers, if you liked watching this session, then please like and share this video with your loved ones too. And do stay tuned with us as we meet again on next Thursday at 8 a.m. for another session on the Bhagavad Gita. Namaste.
So Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.